Hello, everybody. All right, I'm worked like 11-hour day. I'm very sleepy, so you have to help me wake up. Hello, everybody. Hello. Yeah, thank you very much. All right, that did it. I think I'm awake now. An espresso wouldn't help, but that'll do. Okay, my name is Ross Steinborn. I'm with the YWCA North Shore Rape Crisis Center. We serve the North Shore. We serve sexual assault survivors along the North Shore. Technically, Wakefield's no longer in our catchment area, but I still hang out here and love WAAV, so they invite me back all the time. So before we get going, I want to thank some folks who have come from the town council. So first off, I want to thank town administrator Stephen Mayo. Oh, there's a big wave, I see it, okay. And then town councilors Maureen Butt, Julie Smith-Galvin, Tony Longo, Ann Santos, and Ed Dombrowski. Great, and I got all those names right. Thank you very much for coming. Events like this, it means so much that it's supported by the town. It means, I think that the community strengthened when its leaders support events like this. These are challenging events to think about, and they're challenging and hard things to talk about. And I do, but I think it's important that we do talk about it. That it's important that issues of sexual misconduct and harassment and abuse and domestic violence don't go silent any longer. And actually, one of the things that I think, and why we're here today, is that it's important that I think that men start talking about these issues, right? I think for the longest time, this has been considered a women's issue, right? And it's a weird thing to consider in the long run, but because it's a women's issue, and because we believe and we accept this idea that it's a women's issue, men are allowed to dismiss it as having no responsibility, not being part of the solution. It's not my thing. It's a women's issue. But what does that do? How is it the fact that the victims, primarily the victims of this abuse, how is it their issue to solve when they're the victims, right? How come we're not focusing on the perpetrators, who are not always, but who tend to be men, right? Which is a weird thing. And so, but it's not only the men who perpetrate, and I think maybe more importantly, it's the men who keep silent, right? It's all of us who allow our friends, who see our friends say things about their female partners or their male partners, and don't talk about how uncomfortable we feel. And how easy that would be, but how scary that is as well to say to a friend, man, I really didn't like how you treated your partner. It made me feel super uncomfortable the other day. I don't know what's going on, but those types of things, when we think about bystander intervention, have you ever heard bystander intervention before? Ever heard the phrase? Nice, okay, it's a big buzzword nowadays, and I think, and I was just in a meeting at Salem State University talking about this, how bystander intervention, the image that comes to mind is being out at the bar, being at a party, and seeing some stranger take advantage of somebody else and stepping in that situation. And that can be bystander intervention, and I hope that we do come to a place where we step in when we see those actions taking place. But bystander intervention starts with our personal friendships, right? I mean, it starts with like how we react when our brother tells a rape joke. Do we laugh at it, or do we say, man, that wasn't really funny? Or how when our best friend, like I said, treats a partner inappropriately. Man, I don't like how you're treating your partner there, man. Those are the toughest parts, and those are the places where I think we begin to make the biggest impact. So today is a day, the White Ribbon Campaign is a campaign for men to start being part of the solution to end sexual assault, harassment, and abuse, and men's violence against women generally. And it started actually, it comes from our brothers up north in Canada. And the event that started off the White Ribbon Campaign was actually a mass shooting. An aggrieved boyfriend went into a salon that was filled up with his ex and all of the other women in the salon, and he lined them up and executed all of them. And from there, we have the White Ribbon Campaign. The men of Canada started what we now call the White Ribbon Campaign. The White Ribbon Campaign, we need to say before I introduce our first speaker, would be nowhere, and the men's work in this field would be nowhere without the women that came before us, right? Without the women who spoke out when they were told to be silent for years and years, in the feminist movement and the women's movement. If it wasn't for those women and that work that they'd done before, this would be nowhere. We wouldn't be where we're at today. And so it's, I think, important that men do step up, but we also recognize that history. All right. So our first speaker today is Maureen Ryan, who has been the Middlesex District Attorney since 2013. Before becoming DA, she served the office in various leadership positions, including General Counsel, Chief of Domestic Violence Unit, Chief of the Elder Disabled Unit, and the Senior Counsel in the Family Protection Bureau. A hallmark of DA Ryan's administration has been her equal commitment to addressing crime and other public safety issues through innovative prevention programs and non-traditional community partnerships. She regularly lectures and leads workshops on workplace safety, teen dating violence, internet safety, and schemes that target vulnerable populations such as immigrants and senior citizens. She also created Middlesex County's first conviction integrity unit to review closed cases where there has been a claim of potential wrongful conviction. DA Ryan has been acknowledged for her leadership on the opioid crisis and for developing other initiatives aimed at keeping children safe and protecting our seniors. As a graduate of Emmanuel College and Boston College Law School, she now lives in Belmont with her husband and 2 children. So please join me in welcoming Middlesex District Attorney Maureen Ryan. Thank you.
Thank you, Russ, for that kind introduction. And I want to thank the Wakefield Alliance Against Violence for organizing tonight's event. The special thank you to June Peterson and Officer Amy Rando. It's hard to put these events together, and there's always that worry of who's coming and how is it going to go and how is this going to be received. And they've done an amazing job of really being a great resource for this community. But, you know, I want to talk a little bit tonight about some of our stakeholders who are here. You know, Chief Smith, Chief Sullivan, we have Representative Wong, Representative Broder, who do so much every day to be moving the issue of safety and respect forward. And that's the message about tonight. At some point later on, they, along with the Town Administrator, Steve Mayo, are going to ask the men and the boys who are here to take that pledge. But this year in particular, one of the things we have to be thinking about is the difference between what we say and what we hear outside of this room and what really happens. You know, I've been a prosecutor for a long time. I've participated in these events many times, far too many times. And yet, violence against women continues. And when we think about why that is, some of it is the messages that we hear lots of places. If you turn on the radio and you really listen to the lyrics of some of the songs that are on the radio, they're pretty awful. You watch lots of mainstream television, movies, you see the message. Might be kind of funny in the moment, but there are lots of things there, lots of stereotypes that allow that kind of violence to continue. And think about the last couple of months. Think about the 2 young women who went out with friends who were at bars in Boston. One woman left that bar, ended up being taken, the allegation is, captive and held in an apartment for a number of days. One woman, a young mother, ended up in a suitcase, lost to her family and to her child. Think about what we've seen on the stage as one person after another at incredibly prestigious companies, in positions of great authority, athletes, owners, one after another, charged with offenses against women. What's the message of all of that? And how are we making our voices heard around that? Because the culture that allows boys and men to think that somehow being a man is about being tough, that somehow by virtue of being male, you're entitled to do certain things, is alive and well. And at the same time, what's the message that we send to young women? What's the message about how you look, how assertive you should be, what demands a romantic partner should be able to put upon you? Because there is not just the violence that we saw in some of those cases. There's the real power and control that continues to be exercised over women in so many circumstances. Continuing, and this is a case that really illustrates how deep-seated some of these views are, continuing sometimes even into the grave. You might have seen a case in Massachusetts in the paper about 2 weeks ago. A woman was murdered by her husband in their home. Immediately after her murder, he arranged for her funeral. He was a suspect, but he hadn't yet been charged with the murder. He arranged for her funeral, and he had her buried in the local cemetery in a plot that he purchased, a 2-grave plot that he purchased. He's later arrested for her murder, tried and convicted of her murder, and he's serving a life sentence. As part of his parole hearing a couple of weeks ago, the question was raised whether he would agree, as he has refused for many years now, to give the graves back to her children, back to her family. He refuses. He refuses. He insists that he will be buried in that grave with her. He is likely going to be denied his parole because he will not agree to that condition. But it means more to him to assert that power and control over his wife, the mother of his children, who's been dead for over 20 years. That's a very, very deep-seated kind of view. And that's why things like tonight are so important, not just because we come here and we take a pledge, but because hopefully you leave here tonight thinking just a little bit more about those things that you hear on the radio, the stories that you see on the news, the things that you see at the movies, that we talk to our children and our grandchildren more about those stereotypes, that young men and young women talk more among themselves and to each other about what it means to be a good person, to be respectful of other people. Just a couple of weeks ago, President Obama was at the summit for My Brother's Keeper in Oakland, California. And he was with NBA star Steph Curry. There was a lot of conversation about women, the things that were happening across the country, the stings that had happened in Florida. What did it mean to be respectful of women? What did it mean for a man? And the president, or the former president, gave a definition of that, which is part of what I hope we take from tonight. And he said, it's really kind of simple. Being a man is first and foremost being a good human. That means being a few things. It means being responsible, means working hard, being kind, respectful, and compassionate. And he went on to say that if you are a man and you are confident about your strength, you don't ever need to show that strength by putting somebody else down. You show it, real men show it, by lifting other people up. And that's the message that I hope tonight we leave here with and that we spread to the people that we come in contact with. So I'm very grateful to have been here tonight. And I again thank the folks who put this together. It's a wonderful, wonderful commitment on the part of the town of Wakefield and a great resource. So thank you.
Thank you, Marion. Thanks a lot. So we're going to be moving on to our key speaker, who is Mike Krondowski. He works at Respond, which is the area's local domestic violence agency, where he's responsible for the emergency shelter and safe house program. He has an expertise in working with populations touched by trauma, and I think he'll give us a great lesson at how trauma can affect our lives, can affect the lives of people who are touched by it. Thank you very much.
How's everyone doing today? Good? First and foremost, I just want to say how thankful I am to get to speak at a White Ribbon event and to be able to speak to all of you today about a topic that obviously as a male is near and dear to me, and that's the subject of toxic masculinity and reimagining manhood. So for those who are unaware, which I assume is most people in the room, my name is Mike Krondowski. I'm the Residential Services Coordinator at Respond Incorporated, and I've had the honor and privilege of serving in that role for the last 8 months. For those unfamiliar with our agency, Respond is a DV agency. It's the first of its kind in New England, the second nationwide. And it shares some key similarities with the White Ribbon campaign itself, in that it has its own grassroots origins. So in the early 1970s, 4 women saw the scope and damage of domestic violence in their local community, and they actually opened their homes to women fleeing abusive situations. And what started as a call to action for these women took shape and it morphed into an agency in our local community that has now helped thousands. In that same sort of vein, the White Ribbon campaign was started by a group of empathetic men, as was pointed out, who saw a problem and wanted to make a difference. These were individuals who saw a tragedy as a symptom of a larger problem and decided to act. I have to admit, when I was first asked to speak tonight, I was a bit taken aback. I thought to myself, I'm just some guy. What right do I have to sit here and speak to you tonight? What could I possibly tell you that you haven't heard 1,000 different times in 1,000 different forums? And I actually found my answer to that question in the lives and the works of these disparate founders. They turned their passion into action, and they spoke about issues that were familiar, albeit very difficult to talk about. So it was their courage and commitment to service that really inspired me to talk to you tonight. So about my role. As the Residential Services Coordinator, I spearhead our agency's emergency shelter, and I oversee our 24-hour hotline. And that position affords me the ability to really see the ground level work that we're doing and get a pulse on what the needs are in our community. Admittedly, one of my biggest points of curiosity coming into the job was to see what the service needs were in terms of like male versus female clientele. And I ran into some surprises working here. So I knew from my training that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men was going to experience some form of domestic violence within their lifetimes. And when I looked at the call data, I actually saw that only about 5% of our call volume came from male callers, despite experiencing that similar rate of victimization that I was talking about. It was really a stunning discrepancy, and it wasn't until I fielded my first crisis call from a male caller that I really got some insight into why that might be the case. In anticipation for that call, I have to admit that I built it up to be something that it wasn't in my head. I thought there was going to be something so unique and so different about the male experience that it was going to explain everything away. And really, that wasn't the case. What was unique to that call was the concerns about the reporting. This caller was afraid that if they called the police, they wouldn't be taken seriously. Not in the sense that they wouldn't be believed, but that they would be ridiculed for not being able to stand up for themselves and protect themselves. This caller was worried about the snickering and the jeering that was going to take place at work if his situation ever became public knowledge. This was a microcosm of a culture of toxic masculinity that teaches our men in our society to man up, rather than to speak up, as looking for help is seen as a sign of weakness. Now, of course, the majority of interactions in my job are with women, and I'm not a stranger to working with members of the opposite gender. So before working at Respond, I worked at Justice Resource Institute. So it was a residential setting for at-risk teens, also all female. So like I said, I'm used to being one of the few males to represent my agency in what's typically a female-dominated space. And with that comes some unique challenges. Most specifically, the distrust of strangers in general is normally compounded with a distrust of men as well. One of the most significant early memories at my time in Respond that I'm never going to forget is when a resident told me how scared the women of the shelter were to hear about a male being introduced as its head. She told me that she was so happy that her reservations weren't warranted, and how surprised she and others were to discover that I was, in her own words, an awesome guy. It was a great moment. So you see, some of the most important healing that survivors of trauma are going to do doesn't happen in therapy. It doesn't happen in counseling. It doesn't happen in any sort of clinical setting. It happens in the course of everyday interaction. It's seeing men model respect and compassion. It's about holding ourselves to a standard of common decency, a standard of human decency. For these survivors, the awesome guy is the aberration. It's not the norm. And we have our culture of toxic masculinity to blame, one that promotes violence as the primary strategy for conflict resolution and emotional expression. So that was really the first instance on the ground level in my work that made me think really deeply about how men are seen in society, both by ourselves and by other groups. It's really easy and a trap to look at survivors and say that their worldviews have been shaped just by the acts of violence they experienced. But that's a lazy explanation. With actions come responses, and the response of men to violence against women hasn't always been a positive one, especially in recent times. So as many are probably familiar, in 2006, a courageous woman named Tamara Burke pioneered what's now known as the Me Too movement. This was a movement that was revived again in 2017 as women around the world displayed their courage and showed solidarity with one another by identifying themselves as survivors of sexual violence. Unfortunately, too, this social wave served as a litmus test for gender relations within our country, one that I'm ashamed to say that we failed spectacularly, as Me Too was met with a counterculture from men of not all men. Somehow men across the world saw the pain and the suffering of others and opted to absolve themselves of guilt, rather than offer support to their fellow human beings, as if they were accused, as if they were the ones who risked being ostracized. Survivors of acts of depravity, many of whom had taken their entire lives to tell their stories, were met with calls to stay silent. They were told that they were putting men in a box. Their critics blind to the fact that the women speaking out have been put in boxes their entire lives built by the patriarchy. They were told that they were being offensive. They were told that they were misinterpreting friendly advances. And at the most extreme, they were told that they were just lying to get attention. So in that way, not all men became a sneaky way of saying, not my problem. Now, of course, the problem with this is that anyone who works on the front lines knows that arguably the biggest key to helping survivors is working with them to reclaim their voice and their agency. To deny survivors the ability to tell their stories and to make their own choices is to deny them the opportunity to heal. We need to hold the men in our lives to a higher standard, to understand that the response to Me Too should be, I'm here for you. And what can I do? More specifically, what will I do? Not all men should be never again. It's certainly true that not all men have engaged in acts of violence, but all men are responsible for helping define what it is to be a man and lifting up the voices of the most vulnerable in our society. Last summer, I got the opportunity to see Won't You Be My Neighbor, a terrific documentary about the late Fred Rogers. And for the younger folks in the crowd that I'm seeing, Fred Rogers was on a show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. If you haven't seen it, I highly, highly suggest you watch it. I'm dating myself. Now there are younger folks younger than me. But Mr. Rogers was decades ahead of his time on the conversation of toxic masculinity, and he's a public figure that did more to move this conversation than anyone I can remember. He was someone who openly advocated for men to talk about their feelings and to express in words, not violence, the hurt, the anger, and the shame that they were feeling. One especially poignant moment during that documentary comes when Mr. Rogers is being interviewed by a news personality. The interviewer cites these themes that are central to his show and asks Mr. Rogers, in slightly different terms than this, if he's gay. It was stunning for me to sit there in the theater and reflect upon the implications of that interaction. On a macro level, we seem to think that the human qualities such as empathy, compassion, and kindness are somehow counter to straight masculinity. Not only do we deny these beautiful human qualities, we associate them with an outgroup. To be labeled as gay is something that makes men truly uncomfortable. But I ask everyone here, why is that the case? I wouldn't blink if someone mislabeled me as having black hair or brown eyes, for thinking that my favorite color was red, or, assuming that I like jazz music. So what is it about our sexuality that makes us so sensitive? Men are so taken aback because they interpret being gay not as a piece of someone's identity or as a descriptive trait. They interpret it as being an attack on their character, an attack on their manhood. Because so many of us have been socialized to view strength and the stereotypical manliness as the ideal, and to associate anything diverging from that as feminine, to treat that as lesser, and even to treat that as something that's against nature. The only power that labels have are the ones that we all give to them. Modern society has chosen to treat the LGBT community as social pariahs, and as a group, in many cases, and many instances, of subhuman character. We can only defeat stereotypes by challenging them loudly and often, and by educating those around us. To call me gay is to call me Oscar Wilde, is to call me Sally Ride, is to call me Frida Kahlo, Alan Turing, any number of examples. And those are examples of humanity that I wish to strive towards, not run from. I challenge everyone in here today to talk to the men in their lives and teach them that labels such as emotional and gay aren't the labels that we should fear. To be labeled as hateful, to be labeled as hurtful, to be labeled as bigoted, those are the types of labels we should fear, because those are the ones that truly impugn our character. Now, I have to assume that everyone in this room is probably engaged in a heated discussion around privilege, on one side of the aisle or other, depending on what you interpret privilege to be. Some of you may think it's real, some of you may not. Privilege doesn't suggest that you had an easy life, and it doesn't suggest that you didn't face adversity. It simply suggests that there are certain groups in our society who experience systemic barriers and prejudice as a result of historical trauma or long-held societal beliefs. Most importantly, it suggests that people in roles of social power benefit in ways that we don't even think about in our day-to-day lives. For me as a man, that means that I haven't had to think extensively about whether I'm coming off as too assertive. It means that I haven't had to think about whether my clothing choices are going to lead to me being harassed later in the night. Most relevant to my work at Respond, I've always taken for granted that I would be believed and supported if I were assaulted and I wanted to speak up and share my story. To think that I would be blamed is something that seems so foreign to me. And that sense of foreignness is my privilege at work, right? Because I've been privileged not to have to consider those realities. And I can only learn that that privilege exists by learning from the experiences of women. One thing I want to impress upon all men here is that with that societal privilege comes the privilege to effectuate change. As I mentioned before, I'm just some guy, right? Someone who's been given a literal platform and podium from which to speak tonight. I urge everyone to examine the platforms and the forums that you have in the figurative sense. The platforms and the forums that you have to define masculinity in your everyday lives and to lead by example. Whether we recognize it or not, the eyes of the world are on us. We're standing in this room because a few empathetic men wanted to change the status quo. And the White Ribbon Campaign is a prime example that the actions of a few can influence the attitudes, practices, and beliefs of many more. And it is in that spirit that I would ask everyone in this room to ask yourselves, what will I do? And as a tribute to the 15 women we honor tonight, to resolve never again. On behalf of Respond Incorporated, on behalf of the Wakefield Alliance Against Violence, on behalf of the White Ribbon Campaign, I just want to thank everyone for coming out tonight and engaging in such an important conversation.
Thank you, Michael. Michael, your conversation around privilege reminded me of a riddle. Do we have time? Do you guys want to hear a riddle? Or, yeah, okay. So it's a little dark, so I apologize, but it starts off like this. A man and his son are driving down the interstate, and they're in a terrible car accident. And the father dies immediately on impact, and the EMTs get there, and they find the son is still alive, and they rush him to the hospital. Get to the ER, and they say, you know, this kid needs surgery immediately. So they rush him into surgery, and the surgeon washes up, you know, like surgeons do, and walks in and goes, I can't operate on this boy, he's my son. How is that possible? Oh, you guys are quick. Or did you hear? Was your first thought it was his mom? Was that your first thought? Be honest. Was your first thought it was his mom? Or were you trying to think through some other way that surgeon could be the boy's son, right? And I do that in some high schools. And when boys, especially young men, but actually not always, they'll go through such great pains to figure out other ways, right? Maybe he was adopted. Maybe his mom cheated on him and it wasn't actually his real dad. And he'll come up with maybe his gay dads. So many different options that are totally plausible just because that privilege just says women can't be surgeons, right? That surgeons are men. And it's not malicious. In no way is it malicious in their part. It's just that's the assumption that we make, right? And those assumptions, we make those assumptions about people's identity all the time, and gender is just one of those places. And so that just reminded me of that. I hope that it was okay to take a little time. But we are going to move into a part of the program where we're going to be thinking about local impact and remembering those most impacted by domestic violence.
Hello, my name is Kim Margolis. I am a teacher here at Wakefield High School, resident of the town, and I am here with a couple of members of our Mentors in Violence Prevention group, which is a fairly new organization here at Wakefield High School. We've got about 25 juniors and seniors who have become very invested in this particular cause to promote healthy relationships amongst their peers here at the high school and eventually, hopefully, outwardly. So I'm going to invite Kaylee and Amanda, a junior and senior in my group, to come up here and join me. And we are going to share the names of some of the victims of domestic violence here in Massachusetts from 2018. So far in 2019, the Wakefield Police Department has had 49 domestic-related calls for service. 10 of those calls resulted in an arrest. According to the 2017 Wakefield Youth Risk Behavior Survey, 7.3% of Wakefield High School students reported that they had been hurt physically or sexually by a date or someone they were going out with, and 8% of WHS students reported that someone had sexual contact with them against their will. In 2018, 15 Massachusetts residents lost their lives due to domestic violence. 14 women were killed by their intimate partner, spouse, or former partner. 1 male was killed by another male who thought he was hitting on his girlfriend. We will now read their names.
January 5th, 2018, Krista, age 42, of North Adams. January 22nd, 2018, Janice, age 65, of Montgomery. February 10th, 2018, Olivia, age 20, of Needham. February 23rd, 2018, Kimberly, age 43, of Springfield. March 26th, 2018, Luce, age 47, of Lynn. April 13th, 2018, Cassetti, age 24, of Hinsdale. April 21st, 2018, Wendy, age 49, of North Andover.
May 12th, 2018, Bethke, age 26, of Avon. May 28th, 2018, Yasina, age 28, of Lawrence. June 25th, 2018, Dolores, age 79, of West Boylston. June 29th, 2018, Janet, age 60, of Holland. August 9th, 2018, Madeline, age 28, of Sturbridge. September 24th, 2018, Shanna, age 47, of Marshfield. November 19th, 2018, Laudamera, age 32, of Boston. December 19th, 2018, Asilla, age 50, of Everett.
At this time, I would like to invite up Chief Richard Smith of the Wakefield Police Department, Fire Chief Michael Sullivan, State Representative Paul Brodeur, State Representative Donald Wong, and Town Administrator Stephen Mayo to lead everyone, male and female in the audience, with our pledge. If you could come up now, thank you.
We all ready? I will promote respect, dignity, and equality. I will speak out against attitudes and behaviors that contribute to sexual assault and domestic violence.
I will remember myself and others that gender violence is a men's issue that affects all of us, regardless of our background and identities.
I will confront sexism, homophobia, racism, and other forms of oppression.
I will find out how to help when I suspect that someone I know is a victim or offender of sexual assault or domestic violence.
From this day forward, I promise to be part of the solution in ending violence against women and all gender-based violence.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Thank you for taking the pledge with all of us. I would also like to thank Chief Smith. Chief Smith came to the Wakefield Police Department in 2004. With him, he created the Wakefield Alliance Against Violence, which has been in existence now for almost 15 years. He's going to be retiring come June, which is going to be a huge loss for the community. So I would just like to thank you for your dedication, for your work, and for allowing me to be a part of this great group. Thank you. Thank you. Would you like to say anything? Okay, all right. All right. Thank you again to District Attorney Marion Ryan for coming out and speaking, for everyone who came in attendance tonight, and especially my Deputy Chief back there. I know you thought I couldn't see you. I see you back there. We're going to have light refreshments outside, so we hope that you can hang around for a moment and chat with us. Thank you.